He
was it
has
that then caused Julian Assange to be the WikiLeaks is publishing these various documents from various governments. You mentioned governments in Africa and other
yeah.
areas. That didn't upset the United States government at that time.
No, what
But
upset the
what
US government was that this soldier comes along who is a complicated person, but from what we can tell based on the statement that she gave in court during her court martial, and I covered this very closely. I was one of the few US journalists to go cover every hearing in the Manning court martial and to follow this. And there was this day when she came into the court and she looked at the judge and sat, she read the statement that described very clearly why she was drawn to each of these sets of documents. Those documents, to make sure everyone is aware, were these war log documents from Iraq and Afghanistan that were military incident reports that showed the day to day of what happened on the ground in combat during these military operations. There were over 250,000 US diplomatic cables that were disclosed from a period. It was mostly like 2004 to 2010, I think. Then there was the collateral murder videos, the most vivid disclosure from WikiLeaks. Why? Because you can't now because YouTube will censor you, but you could typically include it in any broadcast, and it represented WikiLeaks. It was this visual representation of what they were able to show. This 2007 Apache helicopter attack in Baghdad, and then there were rules of engagement files attached to it, which Julian Assange is in trouble for, but the government has made the choice to not punish him for revealing the video. And the other thing was these nearly 800 files that were assessment briefs for each of the prisoners at Guantanamo. So she tells the court why she's going to disclose these, or why she went to disclose these, and chose WikiLeaks, but WikiLeaks wasn't the first place that she wanted to submit those documents. There was an attempt to go to the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico. These places did not respond her um, her calls, or treat her seriously when she said, "I have this information."
hmm.
Submits the documents to WikiLeaks, takes a chance on it, and WikiLeaks publishes. And the problem now for the US government was that a US soldier had leaked all of this information, and now they had this fallout to deal with. Um, there wasn't any evidence that anybody was harmed from the documents. They've never been able to put any proof in public that a person was killed as a result of these disclosures. But there were a lot of political issues they now had to deal with. There were ambassadors that lost their positions because those governments no longer wanted to work with them. There were people, I think, who were working covertly with the US government who no longer could have those relationships with the State Department or US military because their names had been exposed in the documents. But again, I'll stress there's no evidence that anybody has ever been killed as a result of these disclosures. And so they were upset because a organization was now challenging the wars that the US were engaged in. They were putting these stories into the press that expose the inner workings, the machinery, if you will, of the US empire. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic because this showed all the different ways in which the US exercises power around the world. It showed when they ignore human rights abuses. It showed why they might and why other human rights abuses might be important for them to challenge. It showed how the State Department might work as a salesperson, like on behalf of Boeing, and trying to get other countries to buy the weapons or the aircraft from Boeing. It showed all these things that revealed the US for what it is as a country. And it also showed that there was a tremendous effort by Bush officials, later Obama officials, to make sure that there wasn't any accountability for torture by the CIA. that there was pressure on prosecutors in European countries when they took an interest and wanted to bring their own cases and adopt something. There's a concept of universal jurisdiction, that some crimes are so heinous that you can try people anywhere. That's how Nazis were tried for war crimes. And so they were looking into Bush officials like Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, and there was pressure to drop these cases. That's just some examples, but that is why there was this vengeful reaction from the US government, because now this organization that I think had seemed fairly innocent and probably ineffective had now landed so much information, a volume of information that had never been imagined by the US government, and they never forgot it, and they'll never forget it. And they made changes in government immediately by starting a national insider threat task force. So before even Edward Snowden comes along, they're already aware that these massive leaks could happen, and they took steps to guard against it. But again, back to Julian Assange, this was all about how he had exposed the U.S. government.
What year was this that Manning gave him the documents?
This would have been the end of '09, and then into January, February. The last documents are transferred in March of 2010. So it's over a span of about 3 to 4 months that the documents are being downloaded. This is the time where technology was such that people use CD-ROMs. So there were files that were copied onto a CD and taken out of the secure facility, shared later. And it's always important to emphasize, because it's important to the weaknesses of the US government's case, that Manning had access, had a security clearance, was allowed to be in these information databases, was not hacking the information from military computers, and was able to do whatever with this information, because the role that Manning had in the military was as an all source intelligence analyst who was supposed to be familiar with any information that was necessary to do the job that was required.
So Manning had access. We now know Manning had access to all of these documents legally, and like, did not hack. There was no hacking. There would have been no need to hack. Manning had all the access necessary.
No, but that does bring us, and I don't know if you wanted me to spend a moment, but there's 17 Espionage Act charges that have been issued against Julian Assange. Then there's the one that everybody looks at and says, well, if you would only charge Julian Assange with conspiracy to commit a computer intrusion, what normally gets loosely referred to as the hacking offense,
Hmm.
this wouldn't be a press freedom case. It would be acceptable for the government to come after him. But the problem is, if you look at that charge, if you look at what it was, the allegation against Julian Assange is not that he engaged in hacking. The allegation is that she asked him to help crack a password for access to a military computer. But it doesn't make any sense. And in fact, there's a forensic military examiner that provided testimony during the extradition proceedings back in September 2020. And I know this information too from covering the court martial. There was a discussion about moving around anonymously on a military computer because Manning and other soldiers in this secure facility wanted to be able to download movies, music, and software and put them on their computer without being caught by their superior officers. So the reason why there is this discussion is not to go into information databases that were classified, but it's so that they can engage in conduct that would be unauthorized in their unit. And that was brought out in the court martial. The Justice Department is going against the record in the military court martial by bringing this charge against Julian Assange and accusing him of trying to help Manning hack into a military computer. And by the way, the things that are a part of this conspiracy that they lay out are acceptable actions if you are a journalist.
Right.
Journalists do these things all the time. They will find a source, they will push a source to provide information for their news stories. They will set up a way that their source can provide information securely so they are not identified. They will do source protection so that the person is not caught. But the government, through this case, and then we're seeing it in other leak prosecutions, you mentioned Teixeira earlier. I wouldn't be surprised if they said things related to these tools that are available in order to make him seem sinister. There are things like Tor, that is a browser that allows you to surf anonymously. There's something called Tails. There are these pieces of software, and there are also encrypted chats that you can use with clients. Like there's Jabber. There are these tools that journalists can use with their sources in order to obtain the information and ensure as much as possible that that person remains anonymous. And the government has decided that they would like to make it seem like if you use those tools, you are a criminal and not somebody who is a whistleblower or a source that is trying to get out information that is in the public interest.
Right. Okay. So they're trying to say that because it's not a crime to publish these documents, but it is a crime to procure the documents illegally. And if Chelsea Manning procured the documents illegally, even though Manning had full access to these documents, so there wasn't a need for hacking, but it was the getting the documents, being the whistleblower, and taking those documents to try to get them published. They then are trying to say, it sounds like, that Julian Assange got the first batch of these documents from Manning, got greedy and wanted more, and tried to, then tried to tell Manning ways, tried to aid and abet in a crime being committed. So rather than
Yeah,
just being the person who's going to collect the documents, like, I'll protect your identity, make sure that, do everything that you don't get caught. But they're saying that he went a step beyond that and actually tried to help Manning illegally obtain the documents. That now makes him an accomplice.
exactly. Yeah. So you've gone to this point where you're saying that the journalist is aiding and abetting the leak, so then that makes you the criminal. They actually did this, by the way, to a Fox News reporter before Julian Assange. So there was a big scandal. It came around actually another scandal. They were paired together while President Barack Obama was in office. There was a leak investigation that caught the Associated Press and something like 90 or so phone lines that they were subpoenaing and collecting all these records, which jeopardized the confidential sources of a number of reporters at the Associated Press. But then also with that, there was this investigation into Stephen Kim, who was a State Department employee who leaked information to Fox News reporter James Rosen that had to do with his view. Stephen Kim's view was that the government knew about North Korea and nuclear weapons, and they weren't doing enough to counter the threat and had leaked information to James Rosen. Well, James Rosen was described in the indictment or part of the investigation into Stephen Kim as an aider and abettor and co-conspirator of a leak. So this way of looking at leaks has been working its way into the government for the last 10 to 15 years and taking hold. Only now with somebody like Julian Assange, who I don't even think it's fair to say is a polarizing figure, you can go to all different parts of the political spectrum and find a lot of people who just despise him. He's a convenient target, and they're using him to advance the law in a way that would be hugely beneficial to US security agencies as well as the military.
I mean, it would effectively prevent journalists from ever publishing any classified documents.
It would, the chilling effect would be tremendous. I mean, right now it's already tremendous, right? Well, let's just think about what Julian Assange is going through. Who wants to go through that? If you thought that you might face the same treatment as Julian Assange, you might think twice about accepting those documents and publishing them. I certainly think if you didn't have an institution like a New York Times or a Washington Post or you know, actually, you can't even say The Intercept because they've been targeted themselves by the Justice Department. So, what organization is strong enough to withstand threats from the Justice Department? There are very few who have lawyers who could take on the government. I think you would think twice about publishing.
Well, or you do what the New York Times did and you say, okay, we'll accept the documents. We'll talk about the documents, publish some things here, but we're also going to turn you in as the source, like what they did to Jack Teixeira, right? Rather than
Well,
actually protecting.
or with the WikiLeaks documents, you do something that I think is really despicable, and you act like Julian Assange isn't a partner in the coverage of these materials, but is a source,
Yeah,
which defies my understanding of how language works because uh, the source is always the person who had the materials. The source is Manning. The source,
right.
and the New York Times would know that. Manning is passing the documents on to Assange. He now has it, and now he's the publisher. So when he goes to work with the New York Times, it should be as a partner, but they are afraid to be treated like WikiLeaks, so they created a distinction that I don't think actually exists. But
Hmm.
that was what their executive editor, Bill Keller, slip in a very slippery way chose to do. But they're also previewing the documents. They're undermining the disclosure's impact and the scoops that they have by contacting the State Department and the military and letting them know what documents they're going to cover and whether they should even publish those or not. And so that's exactly why WikiLeaks was started by Julian Assange. He didn't want he wanted an organization that didn't do that, didn't seek permission from government agencies to cover and report on documents.
Hey guys, be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you like this segment. Now, you might be wondering, this seems like it's part of a bigger show. You're right, it is. The full show is at KimIversonShow.com. So, what you're watching is just a clip. And if you want to get the full experience, then you got to go to KimIversonShow.com. The show airs Monday through Friday, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. That is where you can watch the full show. Here, you just get clips. So, click on the link down below, go to the full show, enjoy. Otherwise, I'll see you next time right here. And be sure, once again, like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.